This video was sponsored by WREN.
Hello again. This is nice, isn't it? Nature. Touching the grass, as I believe the kids say. I wanted to come outside today because this is a special video. This is a video intended to inspire hope and hopefully action. We'll go over here. Maybe you watched my other video on climate change, or maybe you didn't and you're planning to right after this one. Now, I don't mind which of those two available options you choose, because this video will make sense in and of itself. I did get a few comments on my other video from people saying that they wanted more solutions. So here, happy now? I'm joking, I always plan to make this one. So let's learn about how we can fight climate change. Go over here then. This script is heavily influenced by How to Blow Up a Pipeline by Andreas Malm. So if you haven't watched that, I do highly recommend it. So Malm starts off by laying the groundwork and setting his terms, so I thought I would follow suit. You see, much of the conversations about climate change has to do with who is doing the harm. So, for example, a family in a Nepalese mountain village burning fuel to do their cooking is doing a pollution. And the American celebrity who pops onto their private jet to go away for the weekend is also doing a pollution. But we don't really need to get into the weeds of ethical theory to know that one action is more morally justified than the other. Ought, does, and will always imply can. So when I'm talking about actions that individuals can do in this video, do remember that ought, does, and will always imply can, so don't feel bad if you can't participate in a certain thing. Like, there are things I think that everyone can do. Filming outside is hard though, there's people everywhere. In his book, Malm talks about the history of environmental action and how environmentalist groups have been hamstrung by a strict adherence to pacifism at all costs. Now, I won't be getting into the history of that, but I will be asking what it actually means for the environmental movement to abandon that position. Because if pacifism is anti-violence, then would abandoning that mean taking a pro-violence stance? I'll talk more about this later, but no. Violence against people is absolutely seen as a red line by all environmentalist groups, and rightly so. But what about a pipeline? For example, the subject of Malm's book. Pipelines aren't people, they're property. So what about property destruction? Is that violent? If we consider a vial of insulin or a wheelchair or a water pipe to the people relying on those things, then their destruction would absolutely be considered a violence. So I think we can call property destruction violent, and so does Malm. And as I'm about to argue for the virtues of property destruction, does that mean I'm arguing that pacifism ought to be ditched as a maxim for the wider environmental movement? Yes. We can reject pacifism while at the same time also rejecting many forms of violence. Rejecting universal pacifism does not mean universally accepting violence. I mean, the reason we usually don't like violence is because it harms people. And if you're a progressive, you usually don't want to do that, and that's good. But what if it's the property that's harming people? The pipeline that leaks fuel into water sources? The fracking equipment that risks local geological stability? The jet engine which spews fumes over the heads of populations? What about SUVs that fill the air with poisonous toxins? The chainsaws and the oil refineries that destroy ecosystems and the food sources for millions of people? Legality is no indication of morality. And if we don't view the climate crisis through the lens of morality, then what are morals even for? Malm stresses to note that at this point, so late in the day, every single gigaton of carbon matters. Every single moment wasted matters. So I want to ask, should sabotage be seen as self-defense?
But strategic pacifists are right in asserting that in the eyes of the public, property destruction does tend to come off as violent. But in the words of Martin Luther King, a life is sacred. Property is intended to serve life, and no matter how much we surround it with rights and respect, it has no personal being.
Property destruction as an act of civil resistance has a long and varied history, but most people would probably think of the suffragettes, who made a case for sabotage as a political strategy. Notorious for their acts of criminal damage in the name of limited women's suffrage, the suffragettes only stopped their wave of destruction thanks to a world war.
As Emmeline Pankhurst once asked, is not a woman's life, is not her health, are not her limbs more valuable than panes of glass?
And we all kind of instinctively agree with that, right? But panes of glass have nothing really to do with women's suffrage. Not exactly instrumental to the patriarchy, were they? The acts of the suffragettes were very often random, designed to provoke and raise awareness, get attention. Go down here. But we are aware, right? We don't really need more awareness of climate change. But the fracking equipment, the SUVs, private jets, they're instrumental to pollution, to the destruction of our environment. They're specifically targeted targets. And that question of too violent or not too violent that so often occupies the minds of environmentalists, that kind of displays the self-centered nature of many environmentalist movements. And by that I mean the question of whether there will be violence or not is not one within our power to answer. Day by day, the longer we go without addressing the crisis, the closer we get to inevitable and catastrophic violence, terrible biblical violence, as climate refugees are turned away, as conflicts break out over water sources, as the weather turns against us and ruins our fragile societies and infrastructure, as people lose their homes, businesses, food and livestock, when billions of animals are wiped from the earth. Armageddon, apocalyptic shit. What's a little property sabotage in the face of that between friends as a treat? I mean, I'm not just going to stand here and tell you all to go and break stuff. Limp Bizkit has had that covered for decades, but it will be a part of it. This video is basically going to be everything that I can think of that people might be able to do. The people want suggestions. This video is suggestions. I will be talking about collectivist action later on, and I know that there are a load of problems when it comes to focusing on personal responsibility and individual actions, but we all do personally want to do things though, don't we? No. Okay, what is your problem? You have been smirking and shaking your head and following me around this whole time. It's very rude to interrupt other people's YouTube videos, you know. I assume you've got something that you think I need to hear, so go on, out with it.
Well, don't get me wrong, I do admire your spirit. I used to be a lot like you, back before I realised how naive I was being. Really, I do. I understand the motivation. It's nice to feel as though you have some power in the face of inevitable catastrophe. But I'm afraid the science is in. Climate change is here. I'm a leftist, like you. I hate that we've just let capitalism do this to us. But the damage has been done. It's not like we're going to end capitalism now, is it? All the most powerful countries in the world are capitalist, and they're showing no signs of turning into socialist utopias, which frankly is what we would need right now. People don't want to do a revolution, they want to enjoy the time they have left. Buddha taught that we must let go of our attachments. that this is the only way to transcend the suffering that is life. We must let go of the attachment to a world that is already dying. Take the time left to celebrate the world we had, what it was, to enjoy our lives and find meaning in the temporary. Like the Tibetan monks who spend hours, weeks even, creating works of art only to destroy them once they're finished. Finding joy in the temporary is good, actually. Everything comes to an end, and it's unrealistic to expect all the people out there watching this to spend what time they have left fighting against the inevitable, when what we should be doing is learning to accept our fate with humility and, dare I say, have a little fun on the way out. I mean, what is wrong with that? Going out with a bang instead of spending the last decades we have raging against an unstoppable force. I mean, come on, we've been warned about this for decades now and we haven't done anything. Environmentalists couldn't even convince people to give up meat and air travel. People want to enjoy life. I care about the climate, I really do, but even I'm not about to join a self-sustained vegan commune. It's too much to expect people to give up on the little joys of life, like a well-cooked steak and a comfortable car, when everything is so terrible. They say it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, for a reason, you know? Because for most people, that's true.
Right. Because it sounds to me like you're saying it's easier to imagine the end of the world than me giving up steak.
I'm just saying, it's unfair to expect so much from the people who are going to witness humanity's last days on Earth. They deserve to enjoy life.
I know someone you'd probably like. They agree with you that we're all fucked, but at least they have the decency to be angry about it.
Oh cool, yeah. Living in anger, very healthy. Sorry if I pass.
Yeah, so aside from your bizarrely cherry-picked appeal to both Buddhist non-attachment and also hedonism, I have some thoughts. Do you honestly think that the people who witness humanity's last days on Earth will be able to have a fun time? If everyone took the stance that you're taking, then fun times would be a thing of the past for most of the world's people pretty swiftly. Do you think the end of humanity will be a quick and painless affair? This isn't going to be some movie apocalypse where all of humanity is wiped out within minutes that we can see out with a bang. Raising our champagne glasses in one last hurrah. It will be decades and decades of untold human suffering. This is the most blatant case of speaking for yourself I have ever seen. Like, I get that you want to make some moral stance, some philosophical point by just doing nothing and enjoying your incredibly privileged life, and you think I'm deluding myself into feeling powerful? Hey, I've met a few climate change deniers in my time. I've heard a few arguments for not doing anything, but I can honestly say that I've never heard one more contemptible as yours. People all over the world are already suffering as a result of climate change, and those who suffer most are those without the protections of privilege and wealth that I assume you enjoy. Those who have already given up things like a well-cooked steak and a comfortable car because those things were always beyond their reach. Time and time again, we see rich and powerful people justifying their use and consumption and waste while everybody else is forced into reducing theirs. What do you do for a living, by the way?
I'd rather not share that information with the internet.
Well, let me be generous and put aside the despicable implications of your ideas, because you're wrong. Your core premise that nothing can be done is just bollocks. Sorry. Every scientist that I've heard speak on this has said that yes, while irreparable damage has been done, there are still things we can do to avoid the worst case scenarios.
But people won't. That's my point. Why waste your life wishing for the impossible?
People are all over the world. Like, not enough, no, but the idea that people won't fight for their lives is just pure rubbish. Even your faves, the Buddhists, uphold a principle of self-defense, and they fight for what they believe in. There are multiple ways to fight. Just because you aren't, just because you won't, that means nothing for the rest of us. Every single extra unit of pollution, of carbon, of plastic and oil in our oceans makes a difference.
Every gigaton matters. Every single plant and terminal and pipeline and SUV and superyacht makes a difference to the aggregate damage done. As Wallace Wells says,
"The fight is definitely not yet lost. In fact, it will never be lost so long as we avoid extinction. Because however warm the planet gets, it will always be the case that the decade that follows could contain more suffering or less."
if fatalists think that mitigation is meaningful only at a time when damage is yet to be done, they have misunderstood the basics of climate science.
What was that? There was a voice.
It was God. They hate you too. Have you heard of the paradox of the heap?
Vaguely. I think I remember watching some very badly produced YouTube video about how it pertains to Twitter arguments a few years ago.
Well, to recap, we would call 100 grains of rice a heap. We would call 99, 98, 97, 96 grains of rice a heap. But we wouldn't call 3 or 2 or 1 grains of rice a heap. At some point, a heap becomes not a heap. And the point at which that happens is unclear. This makes heaps what we call vague concepts. But there is definitely a point at which a heap becomes not a heap. On that we all agree. Just as we all agree that the climate crisis will come with tipping points, at which point the environment will go from habitable to life-destroying. We can't predict when that will occur or what the events leading up to it will be. The only thing that we know for sure is that every single extra grain of rice will only work towards making the existence of a heap more likely. Every single extra gigaton of carbon will only make tipping points more likely. Your philosophy is nothing more than a self-fulfilling prophecy. Nothing can be done because I will do nothing. You will participate in enabling, exacerbating and accelerating this crisis to prove to yourself that nothing could be done anyway. You're basically the Joker, convinced that everybody is as cruel and as nihilistic as you, wrapping yourself in self-satisfied smugness as you watch the world burn. I think I've had enough outside for one day.
Waste your life wishing for the impossible. Back before I realized how naive I was being. We must let go of the attachment to a world that is already dying. They say it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, for a reason, you know? Because for most people, that's true.
Okay, that's better, isn't it? No more interruptions. It just shouldn't be so hard talking about this stuff, should it? It's like the environmentalist movement is constantly in a damned if you do, damned if you don't type situation. If you target the causes of climate change, you're an eco-terrorist. If you do something ultimately harmless but attention-grabbing like chucking some soup over some paintings, then you're bringing the whole movement into disrepute. If you cause an obstacle, you're targeting the wrong people. If you don't forego every luxury, if you don't live a monastic life of self-sacrifice, then you're a hypocrite. And if you do that and you use a sailboat to cross the Atlantic instead of flying, well then you're holier than thou and just showing off. If you do a peaceful protest, you're grandstanding. If you do theory about it, you're failing to provide material solutions. And if you just try to personally support sustainable practices and businesses, well then you're greenwashing capitalism. This video is brought to you by WREN. Obviously, people who have a vested interest in the fossil fuel industry are going to try to put climate activists in impossible situations. The right-wing media is famous for interviewing climate activists like it's the Spanish Inquisition, and the thing they're inquisiting about is, did you ever eat a McDonald's or get on an aeroplane? We have to expect them to waste the valuable time of climate activists, to never let them go without criticism. But comrades, the call is also coming from inside the house. You may feel an itch to say that what the environmentalist movement should have always done is oppose capitalism, the very ideology which led to there being an incentive to destroy our planet, and you'd probably be correct. And so I do sincerely look forward to that time machine that you're obviously working on. But just in case work on that time machine takes a little bit longer than we have available to us, I'd like to also talk about some of the other things we can do in the meantime. And if you were to ask me what one thing we should all be doing to help mitigate this crisis, then the answer is pretty simple. Everything. Anything you possibly can. We're at that stage, I'm afraid. The throw everything at it phase. In his book, Malm talks about calls for a mass unified movement, saying,
"There is something suspicious about total tactical conformity."
Malm cites an open letter by Wretched of the Earth, who are a grassroots collective for Indigenous, Black, Brown and diaspora groups and individuals for climate justice. They wrote to Extinction Rebellion, voicing their concerns that XR had adopted a position of getting arrested as much as possible, and what this meant for people who are likely targets of police brutality and unjust sentences. In the letter, after addressing their grievances, they wrote that,
"To address climate change and its roots in inequity and domination, a diversity and plurality of tactics and communities will be needed to co-create the transformative change necessary."
a diversity and plurality of tactics and communities. There is no one right thing to do. There is no one big day to wait for on which everyone will rise up and abolish all the bad things, united in solidarity and committed towards a shared goal. That's not going to happen. You've met people, you know that. And there is something suspicious about those who claim to support action against climate change and yet who seem to find issue with every single thing every environmentalist does. And even those who would imply that there's no point in doing anything that is short of a revolution. There are acts of revolution which culminate. Revolutions are built. Like heaps, they are vague. They are made up of parts, of actions, of people. If you're just waiting for a revolution instead of acting in revolutionary ways, then I'm afraid you're not really any better than our friend in the park there. Not Boba. That other person. So if I'm saying that we have to do everything or anything, then does that mean that I'm saying that any action towards the end goal of stopping climate change is good, so long as it's towards the goal of mitigating this crisis, that it gets an ethical pass? No. But the line I draw between good and not good is a pretty simple one. Will it risk the physical safety of people? Will innocent people be harmed? I'm not going to talk too much about violence against people because that's a pretty good way of getting this video flagged. But what I will say is every radical environmentalist that I've heard speak on this subject has unequivocally condemned violence against people. Terrorism against populations is an absolute red line across every single board that I have seen. And while I will be talking about militancy later on, it's always been understood that militant action should never be the predominant action. It should never be the only form of action. Rather, it should be in companion to peaceful and non-violent protests as well as other things. So with the most extreme versions of harm aside, let's look at one example of climate action which most people agree was bad actually. Extinction Rebellion got into trouble a few years ago when, during a run of protests all over London, a handful of activists climbed aboard a London Underground train at rush hour, causing delays and upsetting hundreds of working class commuters just trying to get to work. People in the crowd criticised their tactics, pointing out that public transport like trains are actually part of the solution. But the activists stood their ground until one commuter finally lost patience and tried to physically remove them from the train. At which point, this happened. Here we have a predominantly middle-class, extremely white activist group targeting a working-class district in East London where many people who work precarious jobs live, preventing them from getting to work. And then, when anger erupts, we have an image of a white middle-class man kicking the head of the working-class black man below him. After that, the media and public perception of XR was trashed. But what made it worse was their response.
It had the opportunity to wash its hands of the men on the tube, but instead, the official statement exonerated the kick to the head as an act of self-defense, excused the activists by appealing to their high characters. They were a grandfather, an ex-Buddhist teacher, a vicar, a former GP, among others, and defended the action as planned, within Extinction Rebellion's principles and values, centered around nonviolence and compassion. One of the co-founders went on the BBC to bless the action as peaceful and nonviolent. Peaceful and nonviolent.
Austerity in the UK has caused tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths. The worst period of wage stagnation in 200 years. Insecure work is the norm. Most people who claim some sort of benefits are in work. A majority of the people forced to use food banks are in work. Life expectancy has stalled, and parents across the country are having to forego food so that their kids can eat. As Malm and groups like Wretched of the Earth point out, Extinction Rebellion has been lacking when it comes to grasping the consequences of race and class as it pertains to climate action. Like the examples of violent property destruction that I gave earlier on, this kind of disruption to people's lives can feel like violence. Encouraging people of colour to get arrested as much as possible could very well be fatal advice, and kicking somebody in the head is just violent. XR might pride itself on its disruptive yet non-violent tactics, but as Malm writes,
the violence XR eventually engaged in did not target police or private property, but a black man on the way to his job, and this cannot be seen as accidental. Nor do we have reason to doubt that if an XR activist had kicked a cop in the head, the repudiation would have been unequivocal.
Many of the disruptive actions of climate activists frustrate us, sometimes at a visceral level. When activists from Insulate Britain blocked a road and there was footage of a desperate woman pleading with them to let her through so she could follow the ambulance containing her dying mother to the hospital, you'd have to have a heart of stone not to empathise with her. Blocking emergency vehicles is something that most disruptive protesters do try to avoid, and literally minutes before I started writing this part of the script, Just Stop Oil posted a video on their Twitter of their climate activists easily letting through an ambulance and then blockading the road again. But the nature of many of these movements is decentralised. There are cells of sorts working individually under a shared umbrella. Mistakes are going to be made. These are students, ex-GPs, teachers, nurses, vicars for crying out loud. They're random people doing what they can. It's not always going to go perfectly or even well. And so we do see scenes of these blockades having negative consequences that do resonate with the public on a deeply personal level. It's easy to imagine it's your mom in that ambulance, your kid, or you. So why risk it? One reason is because many environmental movements focus on what they call the fossil economy, which, let's be fair, could be thought of as just any economic activity. So therefore, targeting anything that falls within the realm of the economy is fair game. And many environmentalist groups might see themselves as above politics. They might hold that any kind of division when it comes to the climate catastrophe is bad. And there's quite a strong argument supporting this. It is a kind of time-limited issue, and so any time wasted arguing about politics could be seen as a waste of time. But what if the problem we're trying to solve is division, and we can't solve it if we don't recognize it? The story that led to the climate catastrophe is a story of division. Class division, division of humanity from nature, of those who own and those who work, of global north and global south, of exploiters and exploited. Nearly all of the emissions and pollutions and damage is being done by a small number of people. Class division is at the heart of climate injustice, and class analysis is fundamental to solving it. And I think that even people who don't really spend much time thinking about class analysis just instinctively know that this is the case. It's why the public reaction towards such blockades is so passionate. They know that these are middle-class folk who can afford to sit on a road all day, stopping struggling people from accessing the means of survival. It's not the best look. But then, that's also a reason to do it. Sometimes the point might be to annoy, to frustrate, to get people's blood pressures up and to get them talking. In my opinion, steps should be taken to let emergency vehicles through blockades, but it seems to me like the groups doing the blockades kinda agree. But as each day and week and month and year passes, and as a world we fail to effectively slow the march towards oblivion, at some point, doesn't that need to factor into our armchair cost-benefit analyses of these blockades? You know, the oblivion bit. After all, you do hear a lot more of like,
oh, well, you know, I obviously agree with their message. It's just, you know, they're bad tactics.
It shifts the negative reporting of the climate movement onto the behaviour of activists instead of doubting the truth of climate change itself. We'll never convince oil money-backed media to support the environmentalist movement. They will always frame it in a negative way. But I would rather they boil their piss over a painting than be writing columns about how climate change isn't even real. Or what they usually do these days, which is just ignore it altogether. Animal Rebellion, that's like XR but vegans, they've been staging a series of milk pours in which they go into supermarkets and pour milk. They are calling for a transition towards fully plant-based agriculture and a rewilding of the land currently being used for animal-based agriculture. The focus on milk is to draw attention to the harms done by the dairy industry and to raise awareness of the benefits of plant-based milks. This was the list of people tagged in one of their posts. You've got BBC News London, The Guardian, ITV News, Sky News, Plant-Based News, all normal. But then, the Daily Mail. You know, the Daily Mail. Talk TV, a right-wing reactionary tabloid talk radio channel. Two of their presenters, James Whale and Julia Hartley-Brewer, and Sophie Corcoran, who is a right-wing political pundit known for GB News. People criticise actions like milk pours and soup chucks because it gives the right something to criticise. But it seems like that's the point. And at the same time, it makes other climate activists look extremely reasonable and good actually in comparison. If pouring some milk on the ground will mean that Daily Mail readers might hear some messages about how messed up the dairy industry is, and then also maybe even consider old enemies like our Greta as good in comparison, then yay. Yay, I say. And if it makes the public look kinder upon activists who actually target oil infrastructure in comparison to what they see as random and annoying publicity stunts, then fucking A.
In the words of Verity Bergman, the history of social movement activity suggests that reforms are more likely to be achieved when activists behave in extremist, even confrontational ways. Social movements rarely achieve everything they want, but they secure important partial victories when one wing, flanking the rising tide in the mainstream, prepares to blow the status quo sky high.
I've also seen some people suggest that it's bad if any group encourages its members to engage in arrestable actions at all, because didn't you know that prison is bad? Did you fail to consider how not nice is prison? They're volunteers, they know the risks. Climate activists have set themselves on fire in the name of climate justice. Nobody is telling you to go and block a road or throw paint over a building or any of that.
I recognise that it looks like a slightly ridiculous action. I agree, it is ridiculous, but we're not asking the question, should everybody be throwing soup on paintings? What we're doing is getting the conversation going so we can ask the questions that matter.
They're not talking to you. This isn't about you. Just as Greta wasn't saying, how dare you, to you, old person sitting at home reading the newspaper, she was saying it to the World Economic Forum. A literal big room full of the people directly responsible for the climate crisis.
How dare I? How dare she?
There's no time to be quibbling. We have no time left for goddamn discourse. I am this close to just being like, if nobody got hurt, then everybody shut the fudge up with your mind-numbing critiques. But that wouldn't be the kind of thoughtful nuance that you have come to expect from this channel, so I won't say that. Again. I'm sorry. No, I'm not. I'm not sorry. In fact, I'll go where Greta didn't. How dare you? You. How dare you whinge and whine about activists being annoying, about historical artifacts? There won't even be people left to appreciate this stuff if we don't pull out all the stops. If we don't have a revolution, actually, yes, there, I said it. If we don't, everyone take this fucking seriously. We should have been taking this seriously 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20, 10. And now we've done irreparable damage. The time for saving what we had is gone. We missed it. We can only salvage what we have left, and if we don't make absolutely revolutionary changes, then we're doomed. You're right. Not really. What's up? I think you're rubbing off on me.
So, what's up?
Just so frustrating. Why can't people see what's happening? Like, why don't people care?
Well, I did say.
Huh.
Do you need a beverage? Tissue? Oh, God, do you need a hug? Do you, want to talk about it or whatever?
Do you care?
No. But I'm trying to be less I think I need to cultivate a different audience. My comment section is becoming a dark place. Even for me.
Oof. All right. I just don't get it. I don't understand how people can be like, oh, there's nothing we can do, when there are literally zillions of things that we can and should be doing.
Literally zillions. Well, you don't believe you.
There's a lot.
Go on then. Like what?
At the end of the day, our societies will need to change quickly, and wealthier societies will need to change the most and quickest. Those doing the most harm will have to change the most, and yes, that does mean that individuals and societies who consume the most will have to consume less. But to achieve this, we need to do more than just tell people, hey you, consume less. Climate action is an exercise in justice. Justice for those all over the world about to lose their homes and food sources. And justice for every future living thing that will come to inhabit the world we leave behind. Writers like Naomi Klein say that what we need is a Marshall Plan for the Earth. When governments decided to rebuild areas destroyed by 2 consecutive world wars, it took the kind of mobility and political will which we require now. We need governments all over the world to declare an urgent emergency, one which necessitates unprecedented levels of political cooperation and will. So if you're a government out there watching this, then do that, please. But in case you're not, here is my non-exhaustive, I am but one YouTuber, list of things that you might be able to do. I say might because what you should do will depend on who you are. Ought will always imply can. A diversity and plurality of tactics and community. So if you are the kind of person who wouldn't mind being arrested, who has the supports and safety nets to allow you to go and chain yourself to something, to go and sabotage something, to go and paint, glue, blockade, occupy, or destroy a thing, then go and do that. I think it's great that there's a load of retired middle-class white people out there willing to get themselves arrested. There are now plenty of groups that you can support or join who regularly hold acts of sabotage and blockades. There will be a resources link in the description, but do feel free to share any groups that you know of in the comments. If you are the kind of person who could see themselves on a front line, then I salute and admire you. You are much needed. But militant action is not just front lines. It's also things like support networks and bureaucracy. If you're the type of person who can go to protests, then go to protests. Go to marches if you can, even if they do no more than cause a slight disruption. As Naomi Klein also says, minor inconveniences multiplied can cause a huge effect on the economy and therefore the political will. Be a piece of grit in the cogs of the machine wherever you can, and have signs made ready to go. Malm writes about how the environmental movement should be better prepared to launch protests at the moment of climate catastrophes. So for example, if there is a big wildfire or a hurricane or a flood, then groups should be prepared to take to the streets immediately to draw attention to it. You can organise this with friends and family. Even small but loud groups strategically placed can cause a bit of a commotion. Message local journalists and news producers. Tell them that climate activists are about to stage a stunt and things could get messy. Even if they don't, they're more likely to talk about it if they know about it. The more the public associates extreme weather events with overall climate collapse, the better. People need to know that this is urgent. It's the most urgent thing facing humanity. And yet, people still see it as this far off and distant event. Not something that is happening all around them as we speak. So make that connection. So yeah, do protest any way you can. Put up a poster in your window. Use stickers and stencils to get the message out there. Tell people about the groups that you support. Invite friends and family and colleagues to protests. Even if you know they'll say no, it still puts the idea in their head. Make them say no. But I didn't come here just to say, go to protests. And so I will now break up the barrage of things that I'm about to say into arbitrary sections that I just made up on the hoof. Political policy. Maybe you're a politician, a local councillor, a member of a political party, or even just a voter. Here are some of the policy positions that I think should be bare fucking minimum, please. Free public transport and expansion of transport links. I don't care how you pay for it, frankly. That's not this video. Put a donation box on every train for all I care. There is absolutely no excuse for the furthering, the exacerbating of car culture or the expansion of car ownership. That's not to say that there are no uses for personal vehicles, but as much as we can, we should be making public transport much more accessible, as well as reconceptualizing how we view personal vehicles. Because cars, as they are now, yeah, even the electric ones, are not it. I'm sensing something. I'm sensing that there's a lot of men out there still angry that I just brushed aside the finances, getting ready to type a typical leftist style essay in the comments. I'd personally see a moneyless society, but if you will insist, modern monetary theory. There, it's not spending, it's investing. You'll get your returns when everyone can participate in the economy. Oh, and when the economy continues to exist and not get apocalypsed by climate change. Can't balance the books then, can you? So now that I have adequately addressed all of economics, let's continue. Speaking of economics, actually, economic justice has to be at the heart of climate justice. The climate crisis and the exploitation of global south countries, as well as the working classes within global north countries, they can't be meaningfully separated. It will be and is the world's most poorest people who will suffer first and harshest. So any economic policy which redistributes wealth and creates safety nets, which rectifies for past economic injustices, vote for that. A Green New Deal should be the baseline for any political party's economic policy, and if it isn't, they shouldn't be taken seriously by any single person. Nothing less than a complete overhaul of all of our infrastructure and systems with environmental protection as a prerequisite is needed. As already said, we need a Marshall Plan for the Earth. There needs to be a global prohibition on all new CO2 emitting devices. There needs to be a concerted effort to remove land and resources from the control of capitalists and extractionists. If you live in a settler colonial state, then support policies for returning land rights to indigenous populations. If you don't, if you live in Europe, for example, then support any actions which aim to block the buying up of land and natural resources, as well as occupation and squatter movements. When it comes to city and town planning, community spaces which are free to use should be a priority. We need to end the idea that in order to socialise and enjoy culture, one must consume products and spend money. We need to make it easier for communities to organise, and that requires spaces. We need to decentralise the grids, and by grids I mean all supplies of necessary resources, including energy. We already have the technological know-how to do this, we just lack the political will to roll it out. Community gardening and agriculture, solar energy infrastructure and localised water processing methods can create natural spaces in themselves. There are so many things that city planners and local councils could implement if they felt the pressure to do so. The national curriculum should incorporate an understanding of our reliance on nature, how our systems work to harm it, and should instill a connection with the natural world through contact with natural environments and food production. And if you're a good person, the kind of good person who could see themselves getting involved in capital P politics, then do that. Become a politician in some capacity. I know we can't rely on our political systems to get us out of this crisis. We cannot. But I think it's just an obviously good thing to have good people working within that system, day to day. This one is just general, basic advice for anyone who lives in a global north country or anyone else who is able to. I understand that not everyone will be able to, so please remember, all of this advice comes with an ought implies can caveat. Consume less, waste less. We could do with a little bit more of our grandparents' mentality when it comes to stuff. Take care of your possessions. Learn how to mend. Buy quality and sustainable goods wherever possible. Just be mindful, essentially, about what you consume and use and waste. Recycle, obviously, turn the lights off, boil only the water you need, wear a sweater instead of turning the heat up. All the cliches, all the things that have been on infomercials for the past 20, 30 years. Do them. Use your reusable bag instead of a plastic one. Do try to shop in thrift and second-hand shops. If you are physically able to, those things should just be basic by now, I would hope. Cut out meat. Cut out animal products. Invest in alternatives if you can. Like, conscious consumerism is not an answer to climate change at all. However, if you can and you do invest in things like plant-based meat products, then that will have the effect of then making those products more accessible to more people over time. Share recommendations if you do find a good business or group that's doing good things. Share your recommendations in the comments. Be a bit evangelical about people and businesses who are providing harmless and viable alternatives to usually harmful things. If you're the kind of person who likes writing letters, running social media campaigns, or creating websites, you could pressure advertisers, media institutions, and political actors to stop promoting fossil fuel industries. If you're a creative kind of person, make art, make literature, write songs, create content, design posters, flyers, and stickers that people can use. Create banners for protests and blockades. Make memes and infographics and videos. And volunteer your services to local organisations. I can't tell you how many times I worked somewhere where my ability to draw up a pretty decent and eye-catching sign was like a skill that nobody else on the premises possessed. Are you a photographer? Take photos of events, rallies, and fundraisers that organisations and activists can use for their own promotion. Obviously, arrange this with them beforehand. Don't just go following activists around taking photos of them. Like, seriously, don't do that. Are you the kind of person who is a good leader, a good organiser or communicator? When it comes to volunteering with environmental groups, it's not all chaining yourself to bridges. It could be making food, keeping schedules organised, communications, PR and media outreach, research, legal aid and security. Are you a strong person who wouldn't mind using your body to protect others? Turn up. Environmental activists are at constant threat of physical harm. Are you a lawyer? They need you. Help to create community spaces if you can. There are often neglected and unused spaces that can be spruced up with a little effort and then used by communities for organising, support and leisure. Are you the kind of person who owns or has access to unused spaces or property? Consider making use of it or volunteering it to those who will. Grow what you can. Clean up what you can. Volunteer what you can. Attend town hall meetings. Political will isn't just something that happens, nor is it something that will happen just by getting good people to join politics. Political actors need to feel genuine and tangible external pressure. Political institutions can perfectly handle upstarts within their own ranks. They can simply refuse to promote them. But politicians, MPs, local councillors, or whatever it is you have in America, they're people, and they're people who usually live in the constituencies that they represent. And they go to meetings. And if every time they did, they came face to face with staunch opposition and passion for change, if they had the threat of losing their jobs hanging over their heads every single time they went to a meeting, well, that's when we can start to breed some political will. Workers, unionise. You gotta unionise. And if you can, agitate for unionisation. Remember, ought still implies can. I don't want anyone rushing out and doing something that risks a job that they need to put food on the table. But if you are the kind of worker who can, then I've got some ideas for you. Push back against wasteful practices at your company. Does your workplace use single-use items unnecessarily? Does it recycle properly? Does it waste food? Does it procure goods from sustainable and ethical sources? Does it encourage international flights for meetings that could happen online? If your bosses are going to insist on staff meetings, then you should insist on raising some points. Suggest initiatives. I know you aren't going to change the course of your company single-handedly, but you are going to make sustainability and climate action a constant thorn in the paw of management. Talk about this stuff with your colleagues, with your managers, with your customers, and unionise and strike. A general strike for climate change would be based, I believe is what the kids say. But be there for each other. Be there for your colleagues. Workplaces can be a great place to connect communities, even now with the prevalence of home office. Some class solidarity in the face of mass extinction can't be a bad thing. Owners and bosses. I don't know who might watch this video. I want to cast as wide a net as possible. If you're the kind of person who has a level of power, either within an institution as a boss, as an owner of capital or land, then you are in a position to do much more than the average citizen when it comes to forcing political will and offering material solutions. If you're a landlord, stop that. Stop being a landlord. Consider ceasing to exist as a landlord. But if you will insist on continuing, then it is your duty to ensure that any property that you own is fully up to date with the latest energy-saving technology and insulation. If you own unused land, consider donating it, or at least volunteering it to local groups. It could be used for environmental and community actions such as gardens, allotments, housing for those who need, storage or utility infrastructure. If you're in charge of budgeting for a company, then keep environmentalism in mind. Divest from harmful industries and pursue new supply lines that are locally sourced and sustainable. Push back against those international business trips and invest in better conferencing technology. Business trips do way more harm to the environment than normal people taking their yearly vacations abroad. Does your CEO have a private jet? Do you know where he parks it? Consider slashing the tyres when they're not looking, or tell people who will where he parks it. If you're the type of person who's in charge of training or curriculums, then make sure environmental awareness and sustainable practices are at the forefront. If you organise events, consider holding them outside or in outdoor adjacent venues. Studies show that the more time people spend outdoors in nature, the more likely they are to consider environmentalism to be an important topic. Do not obstruct your employees' attempts to unionise. Help them, in fact. Bring climate and sustainability issues to the table again and again and again. Even if your superiors ignore you, don't stop. At some point it becomes more effort to keep ignoring people if enough people are persistent. I mean, like, if you're the boss of like a fossil fuel company or something, then I'm going to assume that you're not the kind of person who would be willing to sabotage that operation. But I don't know, I think there probably are some people out there who happen to find themselves in positions of power and influence who would be willing to do a bit of low-key sabotage. So do that. If you are such a person who is in such a position and are so inclined, then have at it, comrade. Mentality. I changed colour for this one because it's important. Everything I've said today is important, but I don't think we get the other stuff without changing the way we think about a few things. Because let's face it, we are just going to have to think differently about some stuff. About how much we actually need or what we consider to be engagement with politics. One vote every 4 or 5 years is frankly laughable when we consider that every single year brings us closer to catastrophe. We need to rethink how we view our communities and neighbourhoods. That's not just a random selection of strangers out there. If things go to shit, that's your support base. When I was living in Southeast Asia, my town flooded. It was one of the worst floods on record, and I would not have made it through if not for my neighbours who showed me where I could get drinking water and then helped me carry it back. We need to think of ourselves as part of a network, not merely random individuals living in proximity. And we need to build that for ourselves. Nobody is going to do it for us. We need to stop viewing others as being in competition with us, be it at work, at home, online, be it regarding immigration or other minority groups. Competitiveness away from the sports field or the gaming table is only going to be a hindrance when it comes to the kind of large-scale, collective, and expensive action that we need. And we really need to understand how revolutions happen. There will not be one big day when everyone is sufficiently organised enough to overthrow capitalism. Every day can be an act of revolution if you are acting revolutionary. You know that middle-aged woman who spends her evenings visiting elderly neighbours and doing shopping for them, or volunteering at the local food bank or hospice? She has more revolutionary spirit in her little finger than all the anonymous online leftists who criticise all forms of direct action for failing to be revolutionary enough. Put together. In her book, How to Change Everything, which is a kid's book, admittedly, but it's still good, Naomi Klein quotes Henry Red Cloud, who has devoted his life to teaching Native American communities how to build and install their own solar systems, as well as providing green tech job training. He said that change comes
not by telling people what to do, but showing them what they can do.
I do note the irony of me including that in a script, which is basically just me telling people what to do. Irony noted and ignored. The point is, community will be at the heart of our survival and the only way we will do any overthrowing of capitalism. And communities need to be built and maintained. There are more than physical or socio-economic obstacles in the way of effective climate action. The people who have benefited so greatly from the systems which have wrecked our habitats have also been hard at work convincing us all that this is just good, actually. It's just all perfectly fine. Unavoidable, really. Just a part of nature. The idea that we as humans are separate from and above nature is an old one. You see it in monotheistic conceptions that state that humans are the ones with souls, the ones made in God's image, that Earth was made for us. And it is continued through modern philosophy in the work of Descartes and others. It was present in the rushed development of industries during the late 19th and early 20th century. Extractivism. The idea that the Earth is a resource for us to use, rather than the fact that we are one part, albeit an influential part, of a fragile and interconnected ecosystem. The reason why astronauts get so gushy about the view of Earth from space is because you get to see this reality, this fact, right in front of your face. It can be awe-inspiring and terrifying. Our everything is just a pale blue dot, a pinprick in space, inconsequential to all but ourselves. Our one and only home. What seems to us so eternal, so magnificent and enduring, is actually a temporary blip, a mere moment in the eternal chaos of the universe. We are not above that. We hold no special place among that. I think I've lost track of what I'm saying. I guess that's it. That's all I've got. Those are the things I can think of. You know, I try not to be like you. It'd be easier to be like you. Or that plank in the park. People say ignorance is bliss, but so is pure nihilism. Pure relativism too. But it's just fucked, innit? It's just all too big and too fucked. No wonder you've got more subscribers than me. No wonder we're all descending into a spiral of anger and blame and panic and confusion. We're all so confused. Of course we are. It's the climate. It's the economy. It's all that out there. It might as well be everything. It's monsters. It's titans. We might as well be fighting gods. And who are we to challenge that? Who am I with my silly little list of things you can do? Hashtag save the planet. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What the fuck happened there? That was a good list. Really, encompassing. Is it though? Or is it just my way of making myself feel better for not really doing anything? Oh, come on. You recycle? I mean, Germany, it's basically illegal not to. You gave up meat, you're cutting out other animal products, you don't waste, you don't own a car, you shop at thrift shops and, And what? You changed my mind. Don't look at me like that. But you did. I don't know. Feel kind of hopeful, I suppose. You feel hopeful? A bit. I don't know. I used to think that there was nothing we could do, that it was too big, that they were monsters, like you said, that these systems would always be independent of what we do. But they're not, are they? They're precisely dependent on what we do. They're just people in expensive suits. It's just things, buildings and bridges. It's not monsters. And your list isn't just a list of random things that people can do at the weekend if they're bored. It's an illustration of how we can undermine the systems around us. And it's not nothing to offer hope, to breed inspiration, even if we are all doomed. Even if I was right the whole time. So what? What then? Just go gently into that good night, fade away rather than burning out? I think I'd rather not, thanks. What's the point of living if not to continue life, to protect life? If we can't value life, then what can we value? And if we can't value anything, then what's the point of living? I don't want to die knowing that all I did was say there's nothing that could be done. There's nothing left of value. How is that my decision to make? How do I get to deter action that might work on the off chance that it won't? I don't know who follows me. I don't know if there's some kid out there who would have done incredible things if not for listening to me going on about how pointless that would be. Okay, now you're rubbing off on me. Stop looking at me. Oh, okay. Yeah. We have to fight. You know, in actual fights, like battles, you know, like with weapons and people running each other and things. So you've got like hundreds or thousands of people all there to fight, and if your side has more soldiers than the enemy side, then you're likely to win, aren't you? But it's not like every single soldier you have is going to kill an enemy soldier. Some of them are going to die before they even raise their weapons. But does that mean that they're not then heroes when their side wins the battle? Usually the opposite. You don't need to single-handedly slay the enemy to count as a part of the fight. You just need to show up to fight. And we can't predict how the battle will go. We can't predict what our role within it will be. We can't predict the consequences of our actions, but we can for certain predict the consequences of inaction. So don't you dare stop now. Don't you dare become like me. Even if all that happens is you die knowing that you tried. Knowing that you valued your life and the life of everyone else enough to try. At least then you can say that you fought. There's a banner with the words, "Put up a fucking fight for what you love." And then we march off, in the hundreds or thousands. Bags packed, torches flaring, the chants keeping a steady beat. Who shut shit down? We shut shit down. And hours later we reach the mine, the track, the terminal. Sometimes, as we hold our position around a complex of power plants, we can see the smoke from the chimneys thin out. It dies down. And then it is gone.